The Philadelphia Eagles added two key ingredients that they were missing in 2023 throughout this free agent process and the draft. What were those things that are so important? We'll get into it coming up next, right here on Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Eagles fans, to a Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. I'm Louie DiBiase, your co-host, analyst also over at Bleacher Report. Same with my co-host, Gino Camilleri, our scouting director. On today's edition of Locked On Eagles, we get into two main things Howie Roseman needed to address this offseason, and he did that through free agency and the draft. Plus, A.J. Brown completely signed his extension. He is set to go long-term for the Birds. Could he be the GOAT for the Eagles at wide receiver? Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. So yeah, like, you know, you look at the 2023 roster, and we thought heading into the year that they were still the best team in the NFC. They ran it back with a lot of the same core pieces on offense, and they lost a lot of guys on defense, but we liked the additions they made, and they make a trade for Kevin Byard. We still thought personnel-wise, like, they were set to go, and then they were 10-1 and didn't look like they were really, it wasn't after the 2017 season where clearly this team wasn't nearly as talented as the roster of the previous season. I think there were some other elements, of course, some of the talent missing was a key part, but there were some things missing stylistically and off the field, I think, that held them back last year, and I think two of those things were speed and then leadership off the field. And when you look at Howie's moves, both in free agency and throughout the draft, like focusing on speed first, he added a lot of that from veterans and young prospects.
First things first, this goes back to the discussion that we've had multiple times of that after draft sequence where he writes on a sticky note the three things that the Eagles have to upgrade. Can they run?
Yep.
Do they love football? And can they stay on the field?
And that was when they were the slowest team in the NFL too, so...
And I think they also got guys that are durable, Lou. I mean, you got guys like Quinyon, who starts X amount of consecutive games, and Trevor Keegan. I mean, in the 6th round, he's started 3 consecutive seasons for you on a Michigan offensive line. But to the point that you were saying, speed and leadership.
Yeah.
Football is a game played with 2 feet. A majority of the time, you don't even get to touch the ball. You have to be somebody who can run. It's simple as it sounds. That's football, man. Look at your first pick in Quinyon Mitchell. You turn on the tape and you see that 4.33 40 speed that he put out there. But the thing I love about Quinyon Mitchell is not just his long speed, Lou. It's his lack of wasted movement in the open field.
Which is so important for a corner.
Yep, he's not one of those guys that he has that false step when he first takes his first back pedal and he locks up his hips when he's trying to speed turn and zone turn. The guy is a fluid mover, no wasted movement. He's going to learn from Darius Slay, who that's probably what he prides himself most on in his game, is his ability to have good feet and good hips and be one of those guys that can run with the best of the best. And then look at the offensive side of the ball, Lou. I look at Will Shipley and Aiyana Smith, man, they might not be any taller than me, but those boys can skedaddle around the football field.
Yeah.
And they can get after it. And at the end of the day, the biggest quality of all of these guys, Howie Roseman harped on it, they all love football. They're all guys that have been in leadership roles, guys that have played in big-time programs. Those are the type of guys you want in the building. And that's why scouting gets difficult, because a lot of the time you're probably looking at a pick. Let's say Jalix Hunt, for example, right? You're like, oh, there's so many quote unquote better players on the board. Well, we only get to see what's on tape, what's at the combine, what's at their pro day.
Measurable numbers, things you can see with your eye. Yeah,
we don't know the discussions that they have had over the course of X amount of months with their strength and conditioning coach or even their high school coach to find out how they were when they played back then and how their leadership makeup is. Howie Roseman and the guys in the building, they said that they drafted 5 Red Star players. They did a dang good job getting guys that fit the character and the makeup for what it is to be a Philadelphia Eagle.
And you can say the same thing, Gino, for free agency. And you look at that team last year, and at the end of the season, like, I liked the secondary. I thought it was smart to run it back with Darius Slay and James Bradbury. They were your first elite duo. You've had a corner, and I mean, Asante Samuel was elite, but he never had an elite guy on the opposite end. It was Lito Shepherd and Sheldon Brown. Like, it's been decades. So I thought it was smart to run it back, and I liked the Kevin Byard move at the trade deadline, but you saw the age at the end of the year. Not with Slay from a speed perspective, but more Bradbury, Kevin Byard, Bradley Roby. Even at linebacker, you look at just a shot Shaq Leonard and Nicholas Morrow. Teams that were young and fast, like San Francisco and Dallas, Seattle, even though they had Drew Lock at quarterback, Tampa Bay, they were running circles around you. That secondary looked like a nursing home, and you brought in crucial pieces in that front. Not just, as you mentioned, Quinyon Mitchell, 4.33 speed guy. Cooper DeJean is an athlete, a do-it-all kind of player on defense, but for agency, you bring in Devin White. One thing we know he can still do at least is run, is
Very
cover
fast.
space.
Yeah.
He might not be able to do anything else anymore, but we know he can fly. CGJ is one of the most explosive, playmaking, versatile safeties in the league right now. Even Bryce Huff on the edge, like, his main bread and butter is a speed to power rusher. Howie himself called him a fastball off the edge. Like, they got a lot faster, and it needed to happen, especially on defense.
It's a young man's ball game, and I love what you said, how we watched that nursing home, because that's really what it feels like. And it's crappy to say because I'm about to turn 30 years old this year, and I'm like, oh, once you turn 30 in the National Football League, you're an old man. And I mean, that's sport, though. I mean, that's sport. When you have a young kid who, in Quinyon Mitchell or Anis Smith or any of these guys who, they don't have the tread on the tires of these older guys.
Yeah.
That's what happens, man. Like, sometimes the tires just get a little worn down and you just can't keep
quick.
up anymore. And
right?
look at
James
Bradbury. Yeah, that's the most startling and upfront example
I don't think I've ever seen a drop off that quick from an all pro to a player that just almost looks like he's on crutches.
Not in Philly, right? Like, I could say the Byron Maxwell one, like, he was really, really good in Seattle, and then you had signed him, or Nnamdi Asomugha, for example.
Nnamdi was one too, yeah. That's a
but
fair
in Philly, in this a very similar scheme too. Regardless of scheme, one thing that speed will always do is it will circumvent whatever scheme you run.
Fair.
You get guys that can run, you get guys that can love football, and then you plug and play after that, right? Like, I'm sure we see the imprint of what Kellen Moore is going to do, the identity of how he wants these chess pieces, and same with Vic Fangio, but all of these guys have plus 8.45 average relative athletic scores, which is
most of them are in the
marked.
9s. I mean, even look at your 7th round pick, your last pick in Dylan McMahon, the center, had the 3rd highest athletic score of all time for an interior offensive lineman. Jason Kelsey, by the way, was 2nd. So you look at even their later picks, Jalix Hunt, tall, long, but he's a converted safety that runs a 4.6. Like, explosiveness is his bread and butter, speed to power. That's what the Eagles like. So it's funny. It's like they saw the 2023 defense age very fast. It aged like milk. And he said, I'm not doing this again. I saw after 2017, the drop off in speed in 2018, 2019, 2020. I gave it years with these veterans because it was that core, that window. He saw 1 year of that this year, and he's like, nope, not happening again. I'm infusing speed and youth into this team, especially the unit that needed it.
There's one picture of Jeffrey Lurie from the Tampa Bay playoff
I remember the
game
picture. He looked miserable.
where he kind of literally puts his tongue in his cheek, and he is not pleased at what he is seeing on the field. And somebody quote tweeted and said, this was the moment that Jeffrey Lurie said, we are changing this entire thing. And it was kind of true, man. Like, you can't look at that defense in the second half of the year and sit on your hands like you did in 2018 and be like, maybe if we run it back, it'll work this time. No, that's not how the NFL works.
And even when they brought in new guys, Gino, and even when they brought in guys, it was still older players. Like, it was a Malik Jackson. I mean, they weren't bringing in Howie right now is saying, I'm not paying even Hassan Reddick, who I kind of wanted to keep, but now I'm starting to understand him more, especially seeing all the other players he's paying. He said, I'm not keeping guys 30 plus if it means I have to pay them. The guys that I'm investing a lot in, whether it's draft picks and or contracts, you're going to be in your mid-20s, and you got to be able to run. And that's on offense, too. Like, as you mentioned, they brought in Will Shipley, Ionis Smith. The biggest free agent move you made, maybe Bryce Huff is that, but I think on offense, it's Saquon Barkley. Outside of Christian McCaffrey, this is the best multi-dimensional threat at his position. And regardless of position, Saquon Barkley is one of the last people you want to see in the open field if you're a defensive player.
Yeah, that's a scary image to think, man. Like, best of luck to you.
Like, if you're a linebacker, that's the last guy you want to see with green grass.
And that's already after you have to worry about covering A.J. Brown
Right,
potentially.
you already had speed at receiver.
Devonte Smith or any of these young guys that they brought in. Then Saquon Barkley's there as well. And I'm glad they're not going backwards, Lou. They needed to go forward. They had to put their foot in the ground and say, we have to get younger and we have to get quicker. Because at those positions, Lou, like cornerback, not that they just add Quinyon Mitchell. Look at the youth movement they've had over the last calendar year. I mean, bringing in guys like even an Eli Ricks, and you draft a Keely Ringo, and you still have a young Zach McPherson. Nolan Smith. Look at safety. Sidney Brown can fly. Reed Blankenship is young. CGJ it feels like he's been playing forever, but he's still a young kid.
Yeah.
Youth, speed. That's football, baby.
Absolutely. Quinyon Mitchell, by the way, Gino, so Next Gen Stats does a athletic score as well, NSG. Quinyon Mitchell was the only defensive prospect this year with a 90-plus elite NSG athletic score per Next Gen Stats. Cooper DeJean was third. So the Eagles are bringing in athletes. They're bringing in guys that can run. But they're also bringing in leaders, I want to get into that coming up next because I don't think they needed a culture reset, but they needed to bring in some young leaders, and I think they did that in the draft. We'll get into that coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast were brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, we know the Eagles are into speed. eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need, the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers.
This episode is also brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. And folks, 10, 9, 8, 76ers. How about Tyrese Maxey dropping a 50 burger on those Knicks? And if you want to see your Philadelphia 76ers or you want to see the Phillies in a game day, night day, a night where you could catch a game with your family, there's only one place that you want to go, and that is Game Time. If you want to see the exact spot that you are going to be sitting in without clicking into the ticket detail, they have it right in front of your face on the screen. They have last-minute ticket deals up until an hour after the game starts. You can go to any venue. If you're somebody that wants to go to all 32 parks, you could try and do that as well. They got flash deals, zone deals, all in pricing, seat views right from your seat, lowest price guaranteed. And right now, if you are a new customer and you use code LOCKEDONNFL, you're going to get $20 off your first purchase. You want to catch that 76ers playoff game, use code LOCKEDONNFL. You're going to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? You got to turn down the volume because of all the shouting with the hot takes. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that shouting. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Obviously, the Eagles needed to add speed, Gino, in 2024, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They did that, bringing in Bryce Huff, Devin White, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Jalix Hunt. I mean, the list goes on and on. But another thing they had to bring in, and it's kind of surprising because I thought this team had, and I still think they do, but it felt like they had the right makeup to get through adversity, and they had so many young, mature leaders on top of having the big four of, Kelsey, Graham, Lane, Fletcher Cox with Hurts and Devonte and A.J. Brown. It was like, if something happened like 2023's collapse, they'd be a team that could overcome it like past Eagles teams. And that really wasn't the case. And we don't know specifically who it was, but there were still anonymous comments. There were stories being leaked out of the locker room, whether some were credible or not. The fact of the matter is, where there's smoke, oftentimes there's fire. And you could see it on these teams, these guys, their faces. Like, they lost confidence. A lot of them felt like they checked out mentally. They were frustrated. There was finger pointing. Like, it was definitely surprising. And I think they need to get back to who they were in 2022. And a lot of that's going to come on the backs of these younger players, right? Because the guys that were already on the team, that the torch has been passed to them now with a lot of these veterans leaving. But they also brought in, I feel like, Gino, from free agency and the draft, a lot of guys that have the right makeup and DNA to fit in this locker room and to be leaders almost from the start.
And I think what they were missing more than anything wasn't just they had the leadership element. It was just how to lead in like a Philly manner when you're on the field, right? I think the field leadership, especially from like a defensive side of the ball, kind of was it was out the window. They didn't have any guys that were really going to set the tone.
Like in-game leadership, yeah.
Yep. I mean, like CGJ, you might not look at him and say, oh, that guy's an off-the-field leader, but on the field, man, like the guy sets the tone.
He'll wake you up if you're having two terrible quarters. Yeah.
Yes, and he is somebody that the first time you get hit by him, he's not going to just talk with his pads. He's gonna chirp you a little bit, right? But off the field, the torch has been passed, and we're going to talk about A.J. Brown coming up here, but I mean, just to hear what he said in his press conference, how he wants to just make Philly his home and how special this place is. And those are the type of guys you want, right? Because that's what Kelsey and Fletch and Lane, those guys ultimately just became embodied in Philadelphia. And the guys that lead take on this role of just buying into what the city delivers. And I think the makeup of Quinyon Mitchell is going to fit that. And Cooper DeJean. And one of the things about Cooper DeJean that I loved is he was asked the question about Caitlin Clark and if she would beat him one-on-one.
Yeah, I saw that the other day.
And he's like, yeah, she might beat me
if
by
she
one
beats
or,
me.
If
he was
she
a hooper,
beats me.
man. He was a hooper.
And he's a competitive guy, and that's what Howie Roseman, he was trying to come up with a word to like describe how competitive he was. And that's the makeup you want in these guys. You want the guys that love football, because where their energy goes into is the football field. It's the workouts, it's the practices, it's the OTAs, it's those things that you don't get to see the inside look, but going there and showing up and pushing your guys, that's the leadership element, right? Like Jason Kelsey showing up to OTAs last year for the first time in how long? I mean, how big was that from a leadership standpoint? And to see all these young guys come in there, if I'm James Bradbury, right, and I see these young bulls out there in the weight room working and they're with their trainers working their feet and everything, I can't be somebody sitting on the sideline just clowning around. Like, I got to get better too. And it's not just hype you up leadership. It's the leadership of doing the right thing each and every day. And to draft 5 red stars, the character makeup is there. And one of those things is leading, and it's leading by how you talk. It's leading by example. And the Eagles got better in that regard.
There's multiple ways to lead, and I think, you need leaders. First off, you need authenticity, and that's what Jeffrey Lurie even talked about with Jalen Hurts, right?
Bingo.
But you need different kinds of leaders. You need the stoic, lead by example guys. I think Quinyon Mitchell really gives me that stoic, reserved, yet confident energy of a Devonte Smith or a Jalen Hurts. I think he's going to fit in really well in that way. Same with Cooper DeJean. But you also do need, like you said, the guys that are going to fire you up. Like, that's one thing I think I did have issues with Jalen Hurts last year was when they were just sleepwalking through games at the end of the year and they're getting murdered by the New York Giants and their backups. Like, where is the fire there? That's when and maybe some guys just aren't that person, and that's okay. Like, you can be leaders in different ways. Like, I remember, I don't know why this is the name I'm thinking of, but with the Detroit Lions, like, Calvin Johnson was a leader of that football team, but he was never a rah-rah in your face, like shouting kind of person. But you do need some other guys on the team that do that. And I like that you mentioned CGJ specifically, because he's a guy that's not going to let, at the end of the year, I think some people would have said having a Chauncey Gardner-Johnson would have been even worse because of how much of an attitude the guy's got. But I think it would have helped. Like, you need those guys too. You need every kind of leader on the roster.
Philadelphia is an interesting place, man. And you can lead by a multitude of different ways, right? Like, Jason Kelsey was the greatest because he did it on the field. He did it in the press conference. Some clown named Mike Lombardi. He just bought into the Philly mentality. And that's what I think this team got away from. Like, I love Jalen Hurts being that stoic guy because the calm in the chaos is what I always say with him, right?
For a quarterback too. That's we used to say that even back in 2020 that was if he's going to make it, that's going to be a big reason.
But on defense, there's not that guy that's like, no matter what the opposition does, I'm going to put this ball wherever I want to, regardless. On defense, you got to go talk. Like, you got to go pop some pads. You got to get after the quarterback. Where were your edge rushers last year towards the end of the year? They didn't come on.
Where were the dogs? Me and you were texting during the Super Bowl. You and me were texting back and forth during the Super Bowl. Like, look at the intensity and the attitude of these defensive players. We didn't have that this year.
That's leadership, man. Like, that's I mean, Fred Warner, like, look at all those guys on that San Francisco team. They talk with their pads,
It's kind of why I'm getting more and more excited about the Devin White move. Again, it might not work, but he gives me that kind of energy too.
Yeah, like the first time you see him fly from the middle of the field to the sideline.
Yeah,
he
just takes the running to the other side.
Yeah, and he just takes the running back off of his feet right by the boundary. You're going to be like, oh, yeah, we were definitely missing that. And when Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, I mean, this is discrediting what those guys did last year. Like Reed Blankenship, I thought did an excellent job in what he was asked to do. And same with Kevin Byard and same with Sidney Brown. But there was that element that was missing. And
where are the alphas, you know?
Like where are the guys when you're a pack of wolves, you're a bunch of lone wolves coming together, who's going to lead this pack? Like, they didn't have a pack leader on defense. And I think they got a lot of guys that are going to want to, I mean, Quinyon Mitchell, you see his makeup, like a MAC conference player coming in and playing big time football. He talks with how he plays on the football field. And then Cooper DeJean, man, same type of player. And Sidney Brown, these guys talk through their play, which is awesome. And that's a way to lead. And I think that'll inspire the veterans to a degree. And it's going to be a cohesive effort. And that's what they were missing last year. There was not that cohesion. There was not that Philly aspect. They need to get back to what they did so well in 2022. And that's just lead by example and be Philadelphia Eagles players. And that's being dogs.
Yeah. And A.J. Brown mentioned by name in his press conference Saquon Barkley and the leadership he's already showed. And I think that's going to fit. Even Jeremiah Trotter Jr., you look at on day 3. I mean, this was the leader of the Clemson defense over the past several
You think his
seasons.
dad's going to not let him be a Philly guy through and through?
Yeah, exactly. If anybody's going to get it, it's going to be Jeremiah Trotter Jr. And that's why I said the other day, Nakobe Dean's green dot, it's not safe. I'm not saying Trotter's going to come in and instantly be a starter, but I could see him overcoming his limitations kind of in a TJ Edwards fashion and being a leader for this defense. Like, he gives me that kind of energy too. So I think when you look at the additions of the offseason and free agency and the draft, like, of course, what they do on the field, their style, their traits, and their proven ability is the main factor, but leadership is huge. And I think they brought in a lot of guys that fit, like you said, Gino, not only the city, but I think the characters and the personalities on this team. You got to be on the same page. You got to be a close unit. I think that's the thing with, I don't know if anybody was a bad guy back in the day, but you go back to the Carson Wentz stories and just everything about the locker room, and it just felt like there were different sections of the locker room, and it wasn't just one cohesive unit like the Eagles were, I'd say, in 2022. And it kind of got back to that last year. So I think we're on the right track here with this locker room.
The Louis Riddick quote that I had mentioned on yesterday's show, that team building and talent collection couldn't be farther from one another.
Yeah.
And it really felt back in those years that it was kind of like that talent collection.
2015. That was just a bunch of non-Eagles in Midnight Green. They didn't want to be Eagles.
Yep. Yeah. They have to get back to that way because there's something special about that Midnight Green and playing that way. And look at the late 90s, look at the early 2000s, look at the last couple years. A lot goes to be said about that. And hey, the puppy that lost its way, it's starting to find its way back, Lou.
One of those leaders is wide receiver A.J. Brown. He officially signed his contract extension, had his press conference on Tuesday. Could he be the greatest Eagles receiver of all time when it's all said and done? We'll get into it coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. All right, right now we got to talk about Monopoly Go. Game off. Let's talk about it. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about it, but there's just so much good stuff we got to get into about this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes that you unlock. And there's so much to get. You can get unique stickers. You can trade with your friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings, or heist their vaults, plus Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton, including their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. There's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover through Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. So A.J. Brown, regardless of certain media platforms spreading misinformation, A.J. Brown's not going anywhere. The Eagles have never wavered from their support in wide receiver one. Gino, he officially signed his contract extension this week, had his press conference yesterday, and I was thinking about it because he's still only 26 years old, and it's why this extension made sense, because you can continue to backload those cap hits. It was coming up huge. Like, it was going to be $20 million in 2025, over 20. Then it was going to be over $40 million. So they had to get those cap hits down. And I started to look at like the all-time leading receiver list and his pace right now, back-to-back 1,400-yard seasons. I'm not saying he's going to break Harold Carmichael's record. Harold Carmichael played for 12 years in Philadelphia. I think the number was 8,978 yards is the all-time leading receiver. But A.J. Brown's almost at 3K
12
already.
years?
12
That's
years,
it?
1971 to 1983. Yeah.
Only
So
8,500 yards about.
yeah.
God.
So, I mean, Brown's, I don't know if he's going to play that long in Philly, but he's already at 3K, and he's only 26 years old, man. Like, even if he averages 1,000 yards a year for 4 years, he'll be close. And I think he's got some bigger years in him than that still.
I was just taken aback by that number because it goes
Yeah.
to show how different these leagues are these days,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like if Harold Carmichael plays today, I mean, he's a 1,500-yard receiver every single season, and
Yeah,
only
exactly.
over 12 years, he only compiled
Also shows how bad the
8,500
Eagles'
yards.
receiver history can be if that's the all-time leading receiver.
And I think it's hats off to A.J. Brown already, man, because he came in and after having multiple 1,000-yard receiving years in Tennessee, he comes to Philadelphia and he just picks up where he left off. And the Eagles, much like we had this discussion on defense where they didn't have those guys, like they didn't have the Eagles players, they didn't have that at the wide receiver position until they added Devonte Smith and A.J. Brown. And now you're going to have him here through 2029. He's a main piece of your offense, which is basically locked up through 2027.
Yeah.
If you're betting against him not hitting that 8,500 number,
Devontae might do it too.
I don't know what you're thinking. I mean, that seems too good. That's 5 1,000-yard seasons.
Right.
He's averaged over 1,000 yards in both of his seasons here in Philadelphia.
And you don't think he's going to play another 4+ years here? I think he's getting
Yeah,
into his
let's say he
30s.
gets 1,500 over 4 years just to average it out, right?
Sure,
That's 6,000 yards to add to his.
Right. He'll have broken it
3,000
already.
He'll have
Yeah.
broken that by the time he hits 31 years old, man.
Yeah.
By the time he's my age.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Devontae Smith could do it too. I'm just so fired up the Eagles just made sure to prioritize keeping this big three intact. Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. Because we said this on our live draft show. So many teams now know how important it is to have, it's almost a necessity to have at least 2 star passing targets, right, with how much you throw the football. But none of these teams normally commit to these 2 receivers long term. Like, they'll draft a CeeDee Lamb in the first round when they already have Amari Cooper, but then they'll only let that core, that duo, play together for a year and a half, and then they trade somebody away. Or Cincinnati's probably not going to pay T. Higgins, right? The San Francisco 49ers are likely long-term not going to have Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. Howie Roseman's like, I'm not going back to the days of Travis Fulgham and Jalen Reagor. These guys aren't going anywhere, and it's perfect because their age, I can't believe they're only, it's so exciting to think they're only 26 and 25 years old.
Not just 2 passing targets in today's age, Lou. Like 2 elite passing targets is the minimum to compete in the National Football League at this current point in time.
Yeah, unless you have the greatest quarterback of all time or one of them in Patrick Mahomes, you have to have these guys.
And Patrick Mahomes still has Travis Kelce.
Yeah, he's still the greatest tight end ever.
A unicorn in his own right.
Yeah, exactly.
And long are the days of the top wide receivers not competing in Super Bowls anymore, man. Like that is out the window. Over the last couple years, you've seen it. I mean, look at Tampa Bay with the collection of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin when they were there with Tom Brady. And you look at the Rams with Cooper Kupp and multiple pieces
Odell
that you have to
Beckham on
bring
that
in
team.
there. And that that's a passing league if you ever want to see it, man. The evolution is here, and it's not just through the two tight end, it's through the two wide receivers. It's through a tight end, and it's through the running back as well. And how much higher can his output be when teams have to put eyes on Saquon Barkley in the backfield and have to divert some attention that way? And I'm excited to see him become the all-time Eagles receiver and see what WIP has to say about this guy being traded for a third-round pick. Because, hey, folks, that didn't happen. He's now going to be here until 2029. Howie Roseman gave up a first-round pick and then some. If you think he was going anywhere after giving up that much to go and get him and paying him a contract, you're insane.
This entire offense isn't going anywhere. I mean, Gino, is there any player that's going to be a free agent next year or within the next 2 years? Almost the entire core is locked up. I've never seen that maybe ever as an Eagles fan on offense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of years where it's like, oh, we're going to have him, but then we're going to lose X, Y, and Z.
Exactly.
Now the continuity is there.
Like Lane retiring might be the next big change.
Or like trading Dallas Goedert.
Right.
Like a Zach Ertz type of year, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the only way I could see that happening. But
which is exciting.
You're doing well, man. And to say how much better you've gotten in the last week after doing so well in free agency, it's not just the draft, man. It's signing A.J. Brown, and it's locking up all these guys long term like Devonte Smith. This team got better because Howie Roseman went through the ringer the last 15 years, folks. He's made all those mistakes that got all the other GMs fired. Why does he keep this unit together? Why does he draft 2 cornerbacks for the first time in 20 years? Because he's lived through the downs so he can live through the good years. And I think we got some good years ahead of us with this team.
I agree. A.J. Brown's going to be a big reason for that. That'll do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Still got 2 more shows for you this week. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Louie DiBiase signing off. As always, thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.